I'm good to go. All right, Kyle, I may need your, as we said, Phil Ruck, our normal chairman, isn't here. A lot of pressure here to go through the motions correctly. Shouldn't say go through the motions, but so if I do anything incorrectly, Kyle, feel free to step in. So first step is roll call. So we have David Thompson, John Beckett, Ashley Case, Michael Costello, Krista Swenser, and Judd McIntosh in attendance. And Bob Bear as well. Second item is acceptance of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
I move we accept the agenda. Second.
Jessica? Are you gonna do your process, roll call,
Yeah, I was just getting unmuted. Apologies, I'm on my phone. We have a blackout on this side of the river, so. For the approval of the agenda, Judd McIntosh,
approved?
John Beckett, Dave Thompson, Michael Costello,
Approved.
Krista Schwenser,
It's Wednesday, August.
There, approved.
and will either Ashley Case or Bob Bear be raised to voting members tonight, Judd?
We should probably raise them both. Yeah, so we'll raise them both.
All right, for the approval of the agenda, Ashley Case,
Approved.
Bob Bear.
Approved.
That's 7 for approval with none opposed.
Thank you, Jessica. The third item is approval of the minutes from July 20th, 2022. Are there any comments? Changes?
I have one small correction, and that is on page 2, second paragraph, second line. It says that line starts with building will generate about less than a third of the flow as the existing hotel building. I think it would be good to insert sewage in front of flow so that we know what kind of flow it is that's headed out.
Will do.
Any other? Can I get a motion?
We accept the minutes as correct.
Second.
Jessica?
I'm sorry, I missed the motion in the second. Can I get that again, please?
It was John with the motion and Ashley with the second.
Thank you. All right, for the approval of the July Planning Board minutes with the correction, Judd McIntosh,
Approved.
John Beckett,
Approved.
Dave Thompson,
Present.
I'm sorry, Dave, can you speak up a little bit?
Dave wasn't here at the last meeting.
I can hear him now, thank you. Ashley Case,
Abstain.
Michael Costello,
I was not present at that meeting.
Krista Schwenser,
Approve.
Bob Bear.
Approved.
That's 4 for approval with 3 abstaining.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, item 4 is new business. The first item is an amendment to an approved subdivision by Forest Orono LLP for the Forest Hill subdivision located on Grant Road in low density residential district. He wants to recreate lots 8 and 10 from that subdivision that was originally created back in 2006. The applicant isn't here, but Kyle, you're going to give us the overview,
Right.
the rundown.
So this is similar to other amendments that the board has recently looked at with this subdivision in 2018. you'll recall, there were portions on the western and eastern portions of Grant Road that were combined into single pieces of retained land because the applicant wasn't having the amount of lots sold that he was hoping for. In the years since then, as people have shown interest in lots, the applicant has begun to recreate those subdivision lots as they were originally approved at the 2006 planning board approval. So, you know, as we're looking at it, most of the lots on the western side of the road, we've gone through and covered. There's really only lot 11 remaining on that western side. So what the applicant's hoping to do now is recreate lots 8 and 10, which are sort of in the middle of Grant Road there on the eastern side. Both lots would be recreated the same dimensionally as they were approved originally. They both still meet all of the lot size and frontage requirements of the low density residential district. There were no real areas of concern on the eastern side. You know, on the western side, you had some more of that the stormwater buffer and the, you know, some wildlife buffers and things like that. The eastern side was pretty empty when it came to that sort of thing, though. So there were really no concerns. As far as the DEP permit, as we've done with some of the other amendments here in the subdivision, the applicant is still waiting to get their amended site law permit from Maine DEP. I think they're pretty backed up right now, so process is, you know, taking a little while. So what staff recommends is doing what we've done with some of these other lot recreations here, is to make a condition of approval that before the planning board signs the new subdivision plan, if it's approved, that the applicant provide staff with that updated DEP permit. Other than that, happy to answer any questions. But yeah, there's not too much new here.
I guess I have a question. How many of the lots are now in the subdivision? Or which, or maybe either, what are the lots that are still in the reserve?
Right, so there would be, after this, there would be 4 lots left.
4 left.
Yep, so there's lot 11, lot 19, lot 12, and 14. Those would be the only ones remaining that would still need to come back.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions before we open up to the public, for public comment? All right, we'll open it up to the public. See if anyone wants to comment on splitting out lots 8 and 10.
And there's no attendees online, Judd.
Okay. No interested. Okay. All right, with that, I guess we'll close the public portion. Are there any other comments before we have a motion? All right, can I get a motion?
Right? We don't have anything to read, right?
I have the findings of facts.
Well, yeah, we need to read that first. Yep. My apologies. And I will read these into the record here once everybody has them. And we'll do the normal protocol once I've completed reading them in. At the end, we'll go around and get sign off from everybody. Jessica, that's our process. All right, proposed findings of fact, Forest Hollow subdivision, amended subdivision review, August 17, 2022. Pursuant to Article 7, Section 18-210, subdivision review of the Orono Code of Ordinances. The Orono Planning Board has considered the application of Donald Benson to amend the Forest Hollow subdivision, originally approved in July 26th, by recreating lots 8 and 10 as they were depicted on the 2006 original subdivision plan. Properties located in the low density residential district on Grant Road. And based on all evidence presented by the applicant, reviewing agencies, town departments, and the public, the planning board found the following. Number one, lots. That the proposed amendment will recreate lots 8 and 10 as they were approved by the planning board in the 2006 subdivision review from the retained land area on the east side of Grant Road. Further, that lots 8 and 10 meet the minimum dimensional requirements of the low density residential district. Further, that any future division of the retained land which constitutes the creation of subdivision lots will be subject to land use ordinance standards in effect at the time of the subdivision. Number two, stormwater management. That the applicant has submitted an amended site location permit to the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. And number three, overall findings as to the other elements of the Forest Hollow subdivision that recreating lots 8 and 10 from the original 2006 subdivision plan will not affect any previous findings leading to the original proposed approval of the Forest Hollow subdivision and will not adversely affect any element of the original approval, including standards for sewer and water utilities, pollution control, roadway and traffic circulation, or financial and technical capacity. Further, that all other findings of the planning board with respect to this development at its meeting of July 19, 2006 are unchanged and remain in place. Motion? Okay. Can I get a motion, Michael?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. I move that we approve the amendment to subdivision by Forest Orono Associates LLP at Forest Hollow subdivision located on the Grant Road in the low density residential district to recreate lots 8 and 10 from a piece retained of land on the eastern side of Grant Road as they were shown in the originally approved subdivision plan with the 3 conditions.
Okay.
With the following 3 conditions, that all findings of the planning board with respect to the division, this development at this meeting of July 19, 2006, and all conditions of the approval and requirements pertaining thereto are unchanged and remain in place. That the applicant be granted an approved site location of development permit for the amendment by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection and provide evidence that such approval to the town staff prior to the planning board signing the plan. And 3, that the signed amended subdivision plan to include the conditions of approval that run with the property be recorded at the Registry of Deeds within 90 days of the approval of the submitted plan.
Can you get a second?
Second.
Right, for the approval of the amended site plan. Judd McIntosh,
Approved.
John Beckett,
Approved.
Dave Thompson,
Approved.
Ashley Case, Michael Costello,
Approved.
Krista Schwenser,
Approve.
Bob Bear.
Approved.
That's 7 for approval, none opposed.
Thank you, Jessica. The second item under new business is an amendment to an approved site plan by original RSU 26 located at 6 Goodrich Drive, tax map 27 lot 12 in the MDR district. They want to relocate press box storage shed and locate another storage container in the rear of the track. So we have the applicant come up and give us an overview first, and then you're, and where should they can sit right there. So if the applicant will come up.
Yeah. Maybe. I'm Meredith Higgins. I'm the superintendent of R226, and
I'm Bill Cody, Director of Maintenance.
I've asked Bill to be here because he's done the major work on coordinating the application and assisting for this process. So we are requesting an amendment to our site plan that was approved in February of 2020. The original site plan showed 3 buildings that were to be removed, is what the site plan saw indicated on the plan. One of those buildings is completely gone, the old concession stand. One of those buildings was a storage shed that we needed to get out of the way to have the work done up there. And same with the press box. The press box had to come down because the track was coming out further with the expansion and it no longer worked for us. So the storage shed we moved over out of the way and kept use of the storage shed actually, because it's a kind of a critical place to store materials for track and Nordic ski. And then the press box, when it came down, we relocated it to serve other fields as kind of our snack shack area. So the site plan amendment, now that the work is completed, those 2 are in place in addition to a 3rd storage unit that we needed to store materials for our track program. When it was brought to our attention that these units needed a site plan review approval, we worked with the town to provide the information. You see on the attached document, the 3 locations for the units. Those locations were selected to serve programming in those areas and to use areas that we did not need for other purposes, such as spectators or team staging areas, whatnot. The civil engineer that we've worked with through this process provided this cover letter that just indicates that the setback requirements are met, that there are not DEP permitting requirements due to the size of the building impact doesn't trigger a need to go to the DEP for this. And seems like there was no traffic impacts because they are not adding additional classrooms to the campus. I think one of the primary areas that I know there's concern about is the storage shed beside where the sewer project was recently done. And I think the removal of trees in that area exacerbated the concern perhaps. And I think that's the unit that I've heard the most concern about. And just to speak a little bit to that, shall I speak to that now or just wait until there are questions? Okay. So that unit in particular is one that we plan to ultimately put down. It's currently sitting on pallets or skids so that it could be moved. So we plan on lowering that down off of the skids and painting and re-roofing that unit. It looks tired right now, but it has some life left in it, and we store quite a bit of equipment in there. It's really full of track equipment. It serves also Nordic skiing. So when I was talking to staff about that, we have equipment in there that serves 8 different teams. And we really, have to have that storage unit for all of those programs. The question of, why did we choose this spot? Having it up around the track, when the track expanded, we really lost perimeter area at the track because just the circumference of that track now is wider. And I was at a couple of large events up there this spring, and it's really the one area that's flat that has space that you could put something like this presumably is really filled with spectators and team areas and coming and going in that area. So that area is really not an option. And the other perimeter of the track, the grading is either, you know, on a incline, or there's programming there. With the exception being where we put the Conex box, that was an area. So that area serves the throwing areas for track. The shot put is just adjacent to that shed, and the discus is just across the service road from that shack. And because we have the Conex box at the other end, and this kind of helps have something at either end of the track to have storage. So we feel like this area is the best area for that particular shed. You know, when asked by neighbors if we could do anything different, I would like to be able to say yes. We just don't see that solution. We see that that's really the best spot for it. We just really don't have the luxury of not using our entire complex for meeting programmatic needs. And so, and looking at the setbacks, we think we have it in a place that meets requirements. And certainly I'm open to feedback if there's a way that you see that we could make that anything that's better for the overall site plan. Anything you'd add to that?
Not that point. Pretty much it, right?
The other, the Conex box at the back, we plan on painting that kind of a fresh, either white or maroon, just to give it a little freshen up. And the old press box that used to be on pillars or poles is, you know, in great shape, and is just sitting just inside the service gate as you exit the parking lot and head out toward the fields to your right. And I don't think I've heard any concern about that.
All right, before we open it up to questions, I should have mentioned this. I'm in a butter. So I live in Edgewood. And so I could recuse myself. I feel comfortable speaking to this. I'm not on the property line, but I'm more than willing to recuse myself if you'd like me to, or anyone on the board would like me to. You have to tell me if you're comfortable with it or
I
not.
haven't had any conversation with you about that, so if you say you can be impartial, that's that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so open it up. We do questions for them first before you do your.
Usually
You do yours first?
Yeah.
All right, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this has been touched on, from an ordinance perspective and a zoning land use perspective. You know, I mean, these three structures would be considered accessory structures to the, you know, the principal use on the lot there. Accessory structures are obviously allowed. From that standpoint, there aren't any concerns. Setbacks, as were mentioned, the setback requirement. This is in the medium density residential district. It's a 20-foot minimum requirement off of rear property lines. So you can see the storage box towards the back of the track is 29 feet off the property line, with that the track shed closer to the neighborhood there, being between 34 and 41 feet off the property line. So, right, as it was mentioned, there's no issue there with the ordinance as far as meeting the setbacks and the location on the site. When the planning board reviews site plan criteria, one of the findings they make is, talking about utilization of the site and the placement of, structures or any part of the development. That's really speaking more towards the natural capabilities of the site, not so much just general placement of buildings on a lot. So when we look at this here, there aren't really any issues as far as those specific project locations. As was mentioned, the town had been doing some infrastructure work in the neighborhood, and there's a sewer line that runs sort of north along the property line there, to the left of the field, in the general location of where the shed is. Because of this, some vegetation was removed to access that line and do that infrastructure work. I provided in the materials to the board, an email from our Public Works Director, kind of summarizing that situation. I think the biggest, thing to look at here for the planning board and the biggest consideration to have is, we've talked about with projects in the past, the board has the capability, when we talk about, if there are abutter concerns and things like that about visual impacts, the board for a lot of projects looks at screening and buffering, and the ordinance gives the planning board that sort of authority to require those sorts of things. In talking with town staff, specifically Public Works Director, the town was already looking, after hearing some feedback from the neighborhood, to revegetate a portion of that area where it was suitable, to avoid running into the same problem in the future where it would have to be removed to access any infrastructure again. But they were looking into, potential replantings there where it was feasible. So in that conversation, it came up that a potential solution there was having the town and RSU work together to develop a kind of single strategy, instead of having multiple, conflicting or overlapping screening buffer projects going on, to develop one solution where the Public Works Director could facilitate a conversation with some of those abutting property owners to kind of figure out what the best screening solution was in that area, whether it was fencing or vegetation or whatever it was. The vegetation removal wasn't specific to this site plan application. It wasn't caused because of this application. But that being said, the applicant's now proposing a structure in an area that was previously vegetated and now isn't vegetated. So there is a different set of circumstances there than there was previously. So I do think the planning board has some ability to look at something like that. Other than that, I think everything else was pretty much covered in terms of drainage, traffic impacts, those sorts of things. Staff hasn't identified any concerns with the keeping the 3 accessory structures. This really comes down to it was a change from the original approval. Had this been part of the original approval, it would have been considered an allowable use then. It's more so of now these structures have been placed in these locations, and to keep them in place kind of after the fact approval is needed to be given by the planning board. Otherwise, it would become a violation of the previously approved site plan. Happy to answer any questions.
So I had some questions. So you indicated you were going to paint the roof, the storage shed. What was the timeline for that?
Can you say next?
Springtime sometime.
So April, May of 23. And I did have a question. So as far as this buffer, and really this is probably directed at you, Kyle, more is whenever 2 people are responsible for something, it always makes me nervous. If there's not like one person that's the driver of it. The recommendation as you wrote it kind of implies that the RSU would be the driver to me, but I'm not a lawyer. Just says the RSU would work with the town. Is the town's intention to put a buffer there?
So I think talking with the public works director, there was already a plan to, as Rob Yerxa put it in the email, the town has agreed to replan a small portion of the cleared area in proximity to a manhole replacement that required a significant amount of clearing. So I think the town was already looking to do this regardless of, this specific application.
Yeah, that's how I read it as well. I just wanted
Yep,
clarification.
and I think Rob has indicated that he would be a willing point of contact to facilitate that conversation. But would be looking to the RSU to join in, I think.
So for clarification, it would be along that line that's cleared out between the shed and Mount View.
Correct.
And the town would be the one doing the plantings on the RSU property? Or is there an easement there? I don't think there's an easement across the property.
There's not
There's a
officially
sewer
an easement because it used to be town property.
Yeah.
And now it's a different lot. I think part of that was having that conversation between the parties to figure out what worked for everyone. The town was, looking at a specific area. I think that the applicant hasn't changed. When you look at the plan, the project area is that specific, stretch there. I mean, that storage shed is 14.5 by 21.5 feet. So it wouldn't be necessarily a screening or a buffer requirement across that whole property line, because the majority of that property line was not impacted, but it would.
No, I meant just the section that was cleared.
Yeah, it would be
40 feet.
specific. I think the town would be specifically looking at that section that was heavily cleared.
Yeah.
And, bringing the RSU into that conversation would be, with the goal of specifically screening this new structure that they are looking to have there.
So I have one last question. I think it's for you. So, because I like it, how that recommendation was written, I think makes sense. And, you have to assume everybody kind of work together to solve the problems where everyone's happy. If someone isn't happy, the recourse is to go to code enforcement.
If which party wasn't,
So let's say, I'm gonna guess the party that wouldn't be, happy would be the neighbors.
right, okay.
Most likely, I don't think it'd be the RSU or the town. So if they, as this is written, the intent is, it's a great intent, everyone's gonna work together, we're gonna define what the thing should look like, how big it should be and where it should be. And everyone says, let's do it, and everyone's happy. But let's say that whatever plan is formulated, or there's no action taken for a period of time. The recourse would be to go to code enforcement, or come to the town manager, or go to Rob. What would the recourse be? I always like to come up with a contingency, because
Right, if nothing was,
that's not gonna happen. It won't happen.
if nothing was accomplished, then, right, it would become a violation of the site plan, which would be a code enforcement issue, because it's a condition of approval, that is being done. So if it's not done, right, it would be a code enforcement issue. But right, I believe that town would be, if it was a matter of one of the parties not being happy with the amount being put in by the other party, whichever way that went. Right, again, I think that wouldn't satisfy the condition of approval. And that becomes an issue of, is that a violation of the site plan or not? And yeah, that's a code enforcement issue. Is there, whatever the recourse is, there is a notice violation. Does it have to go back to the planning board for further discussion? Something would get triggered there as a next step to continue that conversation.
Have they seen the recommendation as you wrote it? The RSU?
I've heard about it.
I don't know if I sent the exact wording. Yeah, oh yeah, the copy on,
Rob and I work.
Are you comfortable with that?
I'm very comfortable.
Well, I'd just like to say that, after just conversations with a couple of neighbors, I guess I'm a little concerned that about the ability to find a reasonable compromise apart from moving the building. Maybe people's thoughts have changed on that.
Yeah,
So
we're
I
here
guess
for-
I just don't know if, a carte blanche, everyone has to agree, or it's a code violation is maybe going to reach resolution. But
That was my question as well. Do we have to have 100% full agreement or, kind of what's the qualification there? Like what would be a solution that works for all parties involved, right? That seems pretty binary, right? It either works or it doesn't work. And sometimes you might not be able to reach that kind of point. And if that's a condition of approval, that might be kind of a steep barrier potentially.
So why don't we could open up the public and see what people thought. I just wanted to get a feel for what your comfort level was with that. Any other questions from the board before we open the public?
Just an observation, maybe, Mary, I've been to a lot of schools, watching sports and stuff, and I can understand why sometimes those sheds just become like out of sight, out of mind, and it was probably nowhere near where anyone would have seen before, so now it's gonna be right there in front of the center. You said you're gonna maintain the roof and paint it and keep it up to, and lower it a little bit. Is there a possibility of putting shrubs right there in front of what would be the back of the shed that faces the subdivision? So it's not so much of a shed. Krista might know what type of shrubs. I know it's not gonna be the kind that the deers like the white cedars or something like that.
So previously it was actually pretty visible out of the field. It was right beside the concession stand. You passed by every time you walked out there. But it wasn't next to someone's residence across the field. I think we're wanting to find a reasonable solution. I think there is, a point where we have to examine our what we're putting into the barrier of, we're talking about adding back the tree line. Now we're talking about adding shrubs. I just want to, make sure we're all
I'm
parties.
not saying that that's our condition. I'm just saying, is that a possible solution to make it more appeasing to any neighbor that have to look at it or is going to be looking?
We're open to what the planning board feels we need to do to make this work. We typically don't vegetate our outbuildings. There's not an outbuilding that has any kind of vegetation around it. So that would be a deviation from what we normally do with outbuildings.
It's kind of a confluence of events. In part.
It is.
Yeah. Right, so logistically, they're potentially gonna have questions. Is the public gonna come up here? Because that's what we have been doing.
Yes.
Okay, so,
So we go.
yeah. So with that, we're gonna open it up to the public. And we have, anyone want to say anything now?
May I?
Sure, can come sit here for all the record.
And Jed, just so you know, there's nobody online as well.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Hello. My name is Michael Swartz. I live at 17 Mountain View Drive with my family, I have a wife and 2 sons. And our property directly abuts the one storage shed, which is dominated our conversation here this evening. The white storage shed, 20 by 16 feet high. And that's split with my adjacent neighbor. It's sort of splits along the property line. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. If I could, I'd like to provide brief context. My family and I moved here 4 years ago. When we moved in, it was so that my sons could attend the Orono High School. My oldest son just graduated. And that was married 4 years ago when we were looking to enroll, and it was the best decision we ever made. I still have a son who's a junior, going into his junior year. And we know when we moved into the neighborhood that there's a school in the backyard. We understand that. And, in speaking to other neighbors, that there would be noise, but generally it's happy noise. So the first thing we did when we moved in the fall was we took out about 36 trees in and around the property, including a couple dozen huge white pines, which opened up the sightline in that backyard. So there's been a lot of activity. I think this is worth mentioning that we ourselves removed several trees on the sides and in the back of the yard, and opened up the backyard of a 1/4 acre lot. I don't know if there's any visuals. I did not send an email. Got one in my drafts, but I haven't sent one to Kay Drexler, if that would be meaningful to this discussion. I'm happy to send an email showing the current sight lines of the view from the backyard of our house to show what this shed looks like. If that would be meaningful to this discussion, I'm happy to do so. So I also need to say that in my prior professional life, I've worked a great deal in public right of way, worked for a public utility company. I have all too much experience working with the butters and property owners and people who live along the public right of way, who mow lawns that they feel are theirs that are actually public right of way. And I understand things get worse before they get better. In addition to the work we've done on our own property, there is this sewer work that's taking place in the public right of way, Mountain View, and in an adjacent easement that abuts our property and our neighbors, and then reaches 2 manholes right at the point of this shed. And then there's been the school work and all this stuff going on. So I'm very mindful of what brings us here is all this activity, and there's been some neighbor discussions, and I understand some neighbors have spoken to the school and or spoken to the town and or spoken to all of our associates or the project managers and what have you, but I have not voiced any complaint in any regard on any of the work that's taken place. And because I understand it gets worse before it gets better, and I've not spoken to the school or the athletic programs at all personally. When I became aware that this shed now in its current location may be a proposed permanent location, that's what brings me here tonight, as what I believe is the first opportunity to do so, at least on the record. So you won't be surprised, I'm in opposition to the current location. I would, my son and sons have run cross country. They were involved in Nordic, not in track. I'm entirely mindful of the interior space constraints for these programs. I get it, totally get it. And I understand that the desire to move the shed and preserve the space and all of these storage facilities was such that these programs have adequate room. I get that too. And we haven't said a word about the present location of the shed, because my understanding was it was temporary. I mean, it looks pretty temporary. It's on skids, and I know the mayor spoke to that. So I appreciate that some effort might be made to improve the look, but the real issue is the location, and this is the first opportunity for us to speak to it. And I'm aware of the irony of this literally being a not in my backyard situation when I have dealt with not in my backyard situations. So what I would ask is your consideration in reevaluating. I don't understand the constraint associated with relocating the shed to its original location. That I've heard speaking to spectators and tents and canopies. I've been at the Nordic events, I've been at cross-country events, I've been to the track events, and the other teams bringing in tents and canopies and having that spectator area is fantastic. It's the best part. It's the best part of the sport. But having been out there just this evening, I would ask the coaches and the program and team coaches to speak to this. I don't understand how there isn't space for those tents and canopies and team areas, either on the spectator side of the track where the grandstand is, or even tents and canopies in the football practice field. There's an entire football practice field, solid acre, clean lawn, that it's not a varsity field. It is a practice field that would be available for tents and for these other track events, which by the way abuts the shot put and the discus area. That might be a legitimate constraint, but that's not one that I've heard explained and I really don't understand. And in consideration, I need to go back, I'm gonna be a little, not quite linear, so forgive me. The sewer work did take out some additional vegetation. And the vegetation was a barrier to us seeing the shed directly, but my estimate, I didn't use a tape measure, it's at least 16 feet tall. It takes time for that vegetation to grow back and screen it. There is a sewer easement for which trees and vegetation existed. The sewer department, as I understand it, has the right, but not the obligation to clear that area in order to maintain their facility. So, we have 50, 60 years of growth over the line. They came through and cleared it out, as is their right to do. But we can't put permanent structures back over that. We can't put fences or screens or barricades back over that easement area in order to allow them to maintain their infrastructure. There is space, candidly, between the sewer, by my measure, between that sewer line and this new shed, there would be space to put something up. But if we're now talking about vegetation and at cost, I would ask, is it not less expensive to just simply relocate this back where it was? That's what I'm asking for consideration. I think I've covered all the points. We're incredibly grateful for the school and the track and the field and the cross country and the Nordic programs, coaches who are here today, athletic director. I have only fantastic things to say about school and the program and the administration, but I would ask for some reconsideration of this particular building. If it takes some elbow grease and someone putting their shoulder to the wheel, I'm happy to help do that as well. If he's pushing this thing on wheels, but I don't want to be too presumptuous. So I think that's that's what I have to say. I can't think of anything else. So we should get a willingness to endure that.
Thank you.
John?
Yes.
My name is Lizzie, and I live at 8 Edgewood Drive. And I've lived at 8 Edgewood Drive for 55 years. And I've lived in Orono for 77 years of my 82 years. So I've been walking down Edgewood Drive for 77 years. And never have I seen a dilapidated building in somebody's backyard. Legally, it's on school property, but it's really in the Swartz's backyard, as far as I can see. And it's not even a good looking building. It has rotten wood at the bottom. It needs a good paint job, and I don't even know how it's holding all that equipment that you say is in it. And as our superintendent says, it's holding a lot of equipment, and it's still on skids. And I went through the Orono school system from kindergarten to Orono High School, graduated in 1958. I came back to Orono after college and taught at the Adams School for years. And my kids graduated from Orono High. And I can't believe after all these fields were built, that there isn't a spot on this big campus that can hold that building. I don't know of anybody in that area or in the vicinity going up and down Forest Avenue or Westwood that has a building in their backyard. And you really have to think outside of the box. For me, somebody asked me, or maybe I just told them, I don't want, my husband just died last year. And my kids said, do you want to stay in the family home, Mom? And I said, I don't want to live more now. This is my home. I grew up here and I don't want to leave. I said, it's the most wonderful town because people care about one another. They have a concern about one another. They think about one another. So you really need to think about what you're doing. And isn't there a spot on this beautiful campus with all our fields for our students that you can put one shed that's still on skids? Think about it. Would you want that building planted in your backyard? I wouldn't want it in my backyard. And this great family just moved in our neighborhood 4 years ago. And they worked so hard to fix up their backyard. I wouldn't want school in my backyard. I love hearing the kids. I love seeing the lights over the trees, for the football games and everybody cheering for Orono High. It's wonderful. As Mike says, they're happy sounds. But I don't want them joining in my barbecue. So give it some serious thought before you say, okay, we'll just plant some vegetation. Just move those kids on a little bit. So I thank you for listening to me. I want to stay in Orono for as long as I can live. So thank you for hearing me out.
My name is Don Joseph. My wife would be here if she could, but she had reservations with the Jackson State Park, and she could not make it. I had football practice, so I came home working the football team. I live on 15 Mountain View Drive. I've been teaching an oral system for 22 years. 2 years ago, they were redesigning the track, the football field. They moved. I don't call this building a shed. I call it a building. It's a building. Let's call it what it is. They moved it temporarily to a spot up by the shop club. And about a month ago, someone showed up with a Kubota tractor with a, what do you call those, chippers in the front end. Saturday night, 5:30. Cranked it up in front of my house, unloaded it, drove it across my next door neighbor to my left, and started mauling these trees. I call it a Saturday night massacre. A couple of neighbors and I came in. We spoke to Mr. Yerkser, Sophie, and Mr. Prue. They said they shook their head, said that it shouldn't have happened. No one was monitoring him. He was supposed to wait until Monday. I say this in passing because, as Meredith said, it may have exasperated the concern, but it didn't eliminate the concern. Because when the leaves come off those trees, and he took down quite a few trees, so there's no more leaves on those trees. That building is an eyesore. Okay, but we're good neighbors. My wife and I have given over $30,000 to Orono High School. We gave $1,000 to that press box that got moved, that I guess they're gonna use as concessions. That's fine. We gave them the money, they can do what they want. Okay, we've been good neighbors. Okay, I love working for Orono. I've been a teacher for 44 years. I retired about 5 weeks ago. So I love kids. I love students. I've taught track. I've taught football. I'm currently teaching baseball. Okay, I'm proud of all this. It's always nice to have storage. But it was my understanding that this building is going to be temporary. Okay, I know it's met all the setbacks and the requirements. They're all been met. I appreciate you making that clear. But whether the stripper or whatever you want to call that chipper machine, but it took down trees, but it wouldn't have really made any difference. Because when those leaves come off in the fall, that's what we're looking at. Okay, I know Lenny's gonna put a new roof on it. I guess he's gonna put new clapboards on it. Doesn't make any difference. It's a building that's pretty tall. Okay, it might meet the requirements for the easement, but it's like sticking a windmill in front of your backyard. The view is gone. Okay, it's an invasive with noise. I know Mr. Libby likes to park his truck there, and he loads and unloads, his tractor gear. Okay, it's a visual, distraction. Okay, I don't know if any of you have been up there and looked at that building and looked at it from our point of view. It's different. It's very, very different, as Mr. Swartz was saying. It's changed. Okay, there is a solution. There is a solution, as this woman said a few minutes ago. There are other spots on that property that this building could go to. Okay, I would make a suggestion, maybe at the end of the batting cage, or anywhere from the end of the batting cage to the end of that road that goes up. Okay, it's gonna have to be moved, obviously, but it really, that building really shouldn't be where it is. Okay, it's a lot more practical to move it near the road, and it's certainly a lot less invasive. Okay, it's visually impactful. It really is. I apologize. I don't, like I said, we're trying to be good neighbors. I've been very supportive of Orono High School. I've been employed there for 22 years. It's been a good marriage. But I think, as this woman said, if you're in our shoes, you'd say the same thing. What are we doing? Why does it have to be there? It doesn't have to be there. It really doesn't. I implore the planning board to please move that building. The storage end at the end of the football field in the press box, that I have no concerns about that at all. But the building that people are calling a shed, that's really an eyesore. I don't care how pretty it looks in 2 years from now, it's still gonna be there. I would plead with you, this planning board, please, to move the building somewhere else where it's more practical for the track team and less invasive visually for the residents of Mountain View Drive. So I appreciate your time tonight, listening to a few of us. But this is how I feel. People who know me, I'm gonna speak straight. I'm not gonna BS. I'm gonna tell you how I feel. And 2 years is okay. 2 years we've lived with it. And we came in and talked to Sophie, and she said there was no building permit to put that building in. It was done without their knowledge. Okay, so what she said, and she's gonna look into it. And then a week or two, or a couple of weeks later, we got a memo in the mail that said we're gonna make that permanent. We said, "Oh, come on, that's not fair to us. It's not fair to us, especially when there's plenty of room on the property to put that building." So this is what I'm asking this planning board to do. Okay. So I don't think I'll take any questions that anybody has. And appreciate you letting me speak.
Thank you. I think it might be a good time to kind of give everyone some scope of what the planning board can and can't do. If the applicant meets the ordinance, we can't pick and choose what we like and don't like,
Okay,
just to be clear.
okay,
So when I'm saying that, we don't get to pick and choose what we like and don't like.
okay,
We have to, if you comply with the ordinance and you meet the ordinance, then our duty is to vote accordingly.
okay. In the previous amendment A, I refer to as amendment A. Someone made a comment, there was 3 stipulations.
3 recommendations, that's correct.
3
Yep,
recommendations.
yep.
Okay. So, yeah, if someone could make a recommendation that the storage at the end of the football field and the press box is accepted, but you're saying it's an all-in-one deal.
What I'm saying is that if they comply with the ordinance, we're not able to. So we could recommend and try and push for a screening.
Right.
We can't recommend if they comply, oh, change your plan.
Right.
That's not, it's like if you put a shed in your backyard and you met all the ordinance, I couldn't come over and just say, oh, I
Right.
don't like that there. You need
Okay.
to move it. Now I get where everyone's coming from. I understand it. I've driven by it many
Right.
times. But I just want to make sure everyone understands the scope of what we do. We're not getting to choose what we like and don't like.
Right.
We have a set of rules, and if you comply with all those rules, then our obligation, our duty is to say, yes, you met the
Okay.
ordinance.
Well, as you heard tonight, there's no complaints about the other two sections to this issue.
Understood,
That's the only issue that people have.
understood.
So I don't know where that goes from here. See, I guess it's, I don't know. I guess you punt, use a football term, I don't know.
Well, we can't punt.
Yeah.
You gotta either decide that it complies with the ordinance or it doesn't. And then we can try to come up with some sort of compromise or recommendation around some sort of screening or barrier.
Yeah.
That hopefully gets, makes some people happy, but
Right.
I don't think, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, we can say, we don't like where that building is, it needs to be somewhere else. I don't think that that's something that we have the power to do.
Right, I mean, similar to, right, the example of a single family home, you're putting a garage in your backyard. And, you have an acre lot and you decide to put that garage 10 feet from the property line that meets the setback. Your next door neighbor might not like that proximity and might say, you have all this square footage to put this garage, why did you choose to put it there? If it meets the standards of the ordinance, then right, the planning board or code enforcement, whoever is issuing that permit, doesn't have the authority to simply say it should be located elsewhere. Now, that's not meant to take away the validity of public comment or public concern, but that's a different conversation that belongs more in the realm of applicant and neighborhood versus the planning board's ability to make a specific condition of approval requiring that a structure that otherwise meets all of the dimensional requirements of an ordinance, happen. So, the applicant is, I think, welcome to respond to some of the concerns brought up. And as you said, the planning board does have some room in certain areas to make conditions of approval and things like that. But right, as far as requiring the relocation of a structure that, otherwise meets the standards of an ordinance, the planning board can't legally do that.
Who makes that decision? Who would you go to?
So we have an ordinance that lays out all the rules of what you can do, where you can do it, in zones, et cetera. And so any change to that ordinance typically goes through the town council,
Well,
right? It's a political action. We're not a political.
so then it needs to go to the town council.
So that's a policy discussion involving a change to the ordinance that's separate from a specific
Instance.
They
development.
need to refer to the town council.
Nope, so the town council, they define the ordinance, which is the rules we follow. They're not looking at every specific instance if someone wants to do something in the town. Right, we take each of these.
No, Jed, I would just say that if there was more public comment that the person should speak here, just because.
Yes.
I always have to pick up the conversation for minutes and people, anyone watching remotely or watching the video in the future. So if anyone has public comment, it should be made from up here.
Agreed.
So it seems to me that the way to approach this is with the school. They put the shed where it is. And it's clearly not up to the planning board. But you should be lobbying the RSU.
So why don't we, at this point, I don't know if you want to respond to any of the comments, mostly around where that is positioned.
Yeah.
Okay, and so she needs to be here. Yep.
Thank you.
I'd like to make one comment, Chairman. I've been on this board for 20-odd years. And I can tell you that when we do not do as what you just outlined, we can be taken to court and it happens. And it has to come back and we have to, this is pretty serious. We have
Agreed.
rules, ordinances, we have to follow them.
Agreed.
We can't make any exceptions.
Agreed.
I had a question. I would like to see a picture of what we're dealing with. So when we do kind of look at approval, we can kind of have good recommendations about what to do. Because, I'm seeing a square on a map. And the only time I ever interact with the shed is during ski season, and it's not in my head like where it is. I would love to see the view from kind of behind. Maybe so that when we do make, recommendations about vegetation, Yeah.
I'm sorry. to cut you off.
I don't have one. You can forward it to us and we can show it.
Why don't you go ahead and respond?
Yeah, so I think the main question is alternate locations. And as I said earlier, the decision for placing it in that area was based on several factors. One is the programming that it serves. So moving it further away from the track is not a reasonable solution because we're taking equipment up to the track from that location and at the throwing areas. It's closer to the throwing areas, one of the proposed other locations, or it's not too far away from the throwing areas, but it's certainly further away from the track for further equipment. And then the area where it was formerly located, I was at the track for a couple of really big meets this year, as was discussed. And so, the canopies are there, but also the movement back and forth, to locations, to the grandstand. There's just limited space there. So the area that was formerly there is greatly reduced. And so, that would be ideal for us to have a shed there, but we don't think it's practical to have a shed there with the space that we need for people moving about and team areas. So we feel like the location that we put it really best serves the needs of the programming. And so that's why we've chosen this location and feel like the other locations really aren't suitable. When you walk out to our fields, when nothing's happening there, it does look like a great big open, expansive area. But when we have events happening, it's pretty easy to see how it gets really, really tight. And when we hosted the regional track championships this year, they're called the PBCs. That was probably the most full our facility will be, unless we were to host, I don't know, maybe state or something. I don't know that we can host state with our facility right now. It was very crowded over there. And so I just don't see another location being practical.
Am I allowed to speak here or no?
You should come up so it's all on the record.
So any other questions from the board before I?
Is it okay, Kyle? Thank you. Is it okay if we introduce the picture somehow, or can you email it to you, or?
So I got the email. I do think typically the planning board, if it's applicant submission material, I'm not sure the planning board wants to
It's not pertinent.
see those materials from the public versus having the applicant submit them.
Yeah.
So if the planning board feels as though there is missing information as far as the application goes, they would like to see something more before making a formal decision. I think that would move more in the territory of wanting to table the conversation until, the next planning board meeting, having the applicant supply whatever information the planning board was looking for versus, not that the pictures are bad or incorrect or anything like that, but just to follow that the applicant is submitting an application. If the planning board is looking for more information, it should come from the applicant.
Understood. Okay. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Any more public comment?
I'd like to ask a question if I should come up to.
Yep.
So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak, Michael Swartz. But if I understand correctly, from a process perspective, this doesn't really fall before the planning committee. The only thing before the planning committee is, can this revision to the February 2020 application, is that acceptable within the ordinances? And if it is, then you have to do your job.
Right, does this comply?
Does this comply with the ordinance as an amendment to the February 2020. So with that being said, I'm happy to stop talking and troubling you. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'll take this, down another avenue, but that's a helpful clarification.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I'm going to politely disagree that there are other locations that build. Okay, I know the track coach would like to have, and Meredith would like to have that building where it is. Simple, logistically, very simple. There is room along that road from the batting cage up to the shot put and the discus circle. Okay, if not, there is some room on the other side of that pine tree. Okay, it's just a question of, do we want to? It's not a question of can we, it can be done. Okay, and what we said tonight, for the neighbors who are there, it's a visual distraction. Okay, and I hear from the RSU 26 that they're sort of adamant about they want to keep it there. I hear that, and that's my fear. But I'm going to give this one here. There are other places in that landscape, that this building can go if people want to move it. That is very functional, less invasive visually, and more practical for Mr. Libby and his pickup truck to pick up his gear. It really is. Okay, like I said, I'm going to speak honestly here. I'm not going to sit in my hands and say, I wish I had said this or that. I'm not, because I know that field very, very well. Going back to Mike's point earlier, the discus is on that spare football field, the practice field. So they probably can't put too many tents there unless they're on the end or the other end. I don't think there's any more Jake Kaufmans that are going to throw that discus a mile out the space. But maybe where that goalpost is, that lone goalpost, there's room for tents. But in the other part of that field, I can see not, because it's discus. But for this building, and it's not a shed, this building, there is room somewhere on that complex where that can go. It is very functional and less invasive. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
All right, with that, I think we should close the public comment. Any discussion?
It's just a question. Who in the town authorized the vegetation?
The vegetation,
Removal.
removal.
Was the sewer department?
I'm not. I
They
wasn't
tend to show up
involved.
and come with a big piece of equipment, just make a road. At least on my, next to my land, they do anyway. All of a sudden, there's a road out to their sewer court.
Yeah, so I think Public Works and the wastewater facility, I believe they worked with someone who did the clearing, but I'm not 100% on that. I don't want to give any wrong information there. It does seem that there was some probably unintentional clearing there as part of that. And that's why in Rob's email, he talked about having already been looking at some of that replanting there.
Any other?
So as a newer member, I'm very aware because I just was trained, a year ago, of the quasi judicial nature of my appointment here. On the other hand, there are real concerns, like human concerns about the visual impacts of this. And I think we need to consider that. So although it meets the ordinance, I think we need to be very cognizant of how it looks and maybe put time constraints on renovating it and putting some vegetation in to be sure that if this is where the structure is going to remain, it has the least visual impact. Maybe we look at a beautiful mural on the back of it, or, I don't know, but there's got to be a solution that makes the impact, the visual impact less, because right now, like I said, I haven't seen a picture of it, but right now it sounds like you're looking at this kind of not very beautiful structure in your backyard. I wouldn't want that in mine. I bought my house because it had trees in the backyard. And it's awesome. So I understand, that there might be that with the neighbors. I would want to put in maybe time constraints on either vegetation or painting and renovation of the shed to make it look better.
So to respond to that there's very clearly in the land use ordinance, when we talk about buffering and screening, it very clearly gives the planning board the ability to require those sorts of things for exactly this purpose. I mean, that exact standard is to shield incompatible uses. The planning board can require screening of some sort, whether it's through vegetation or a fence. So that's very clear. When it gets into the idea of the aesthetics of a structure itself, there are no design standards in the land use ordinance. The town council in the past, from a policy perspective, specifically stayed out of that realm and out of even the property maintenance realm of requiring things to be structures to be painted, or because then it becomes a enforcement issue and a subjective nature of what's visually acceptable for one person versus other person, and what sort of constraints a person might have in maintaining that sort of thing. There have been discussions in the town in the past about those sorts of things. Currently, those design kind of requirements don't exist for something like this. When we talk about commercial buildings in the village commercial downtown, or on Park Street, the ordinance does specify those sorts of design things, having certain amounts of architectural features and maintaining a certain visual aesthetic. For things like on someone's residential property with their home or a garage, or those standards just don't exist in the ordinance. So what you're talking about with the planning board's role, I think it's very clear that the planning board can require those sorts of things when it comes to buffering and screening. I don't think that same authority is given over the actual design components of the building itself.
So we can make requirements about vegetation, fencing, but not
Right.
about paint.
Right, and I think conditions of approval can outline certain dates, or what we were talking about before is where are the kind of checkpoints in there to make sure things actually get done. I think that can be worded more specifically to put more emphasis on a certain party doing something, on more specifics on a certain plan being developed, with a certain goal in mind, with a certain time frame in mind. I think those are things in the planning board's realm. But as far as, I think the part about what the applicant is talking about, making improvements to the structure, painting, lowering it, redoing the roof. I think those things are things that can be communicated and documented in the minutes, but less. The planning board isn't going to be making findings of fact if they make a decision on those design components.
So we shouldn't, even though they offered it, put it as a recommendation, is what you're saying, the painting and the roofing specifically. Yeah, understood.
Just so I completely understand, the existing building, we call it a building, is not in very good repair. Is that what I understand? It's
correct.
Really needs an uplifting. So, and this type of thing has come up in the past, and usually what the planning board will do is ask the applicant if they can't remedy the situation. I understand the reason why you want to keep it where it's shown on the plan, but in act of good faith would be as well. Okay, it's not a very good look building. We'll make it look a lot better.
Right. So
I mean, I wouldn't want to look at it either.
right, and I think that's what
They agree to that.
the applicant has said, is that the visual condition of the building would be approved, and
Okay.
it would be right, an act of good, intention versus the planning board actually making it a specific.
I've lived in Orono for 56 years or whatever. Most of my 85 years, so I have a little bit of a hearing problem. I don't always hear everything clearly the first time, or the second time for that matter.
Understood. Yeah, so they did indicate that they would paint it and roof it, and lower it by spring of 23. I guess the only question is that this recommendation as it reads, I think it reads pretty well. It just doesn't have a timeline on it, doesn't have a date. And so I don't know if we'd want to try to put a date on that there'd be some sort of, as you mentioned, Ashley. Would we want to try and say that there'd be some barrier in place by June 1st, or I'm just throwing out a date. Because I don't know if right now, Krista, would you want to plant anything right now? If you want to. Planning, you're muted.
You're muted, Krista.
So I just throw it.
Okay.
It's very hard to find contractors now. It's real.
Yeah, okay.
Shortage of people, so it might be reasonable for the date of next spring sometime. I doubt if anybody could get in there, unless it's a small project. We're not gonna get it done this fall.
Yeah, Krista, what's reasonable if we were to put a date on there?
Oh, I think it would, I don't think you want to probably plant in the current dry conditions, wait a little bit, but get them in relatively early. And if they are plants that are bald, they will be ready to, and they kept watered, they should be fine. And roots continue to grow at least into November because the soil doesn't cool off as fast as the air. And so then they'd be all set to really get going in the spring.
Yeah,
Or they
Steve,
could be planted in the spring if, you can't get the whole plant together this fast. But if they go in the spring, they should really go relatively early in the spring, not wait till the summer.
So like a May 1st deadline, is that what if you were going to plant them in the spring, would you want them in the ground by May 1st?
Oh, let's say May 15.
May 15?
Well, actually, maybe May 1st for deciduous trees so they can be in the ground when they leaf out.
Maybe another way of looking at it would be to put more of a timeline on the conversation taking place between staff, the applicant, and the neighborhood to come up with the plan, and then have a goal of a time when it would actually be executed on the basis, knowing that, as Dave said, contractor availability and proper planting conditions and all those sorts of things. That could be another kind of way of wording that.
So the conversation.
We do have an offer from Rob Yorkshire to coordinate all of this. So it seems to me that would be the way to go. I mean, he can coordinate the different parties that are involved and be kind of, in some ways, a neutral party in dealing with this. And his shop, knows how to do these things.
As you were discussing, I was also thinking about what was commented before, where it talks at the end there about developing a solution that works for all parties involved. This is language that we usually try to stay away from, but adding on to the end there to the maximum extent practicable might gives the board some room where if something were to come back to the board or to code enforcement to say, okay, well, there's still a party that isn't completely satisfied with this, but this was really the most that could be done in a reasonable fashion. that language is used in ordinances. You know, there are certain times we stay away from it because it can open up things to be more subjective, and the planning board in a rough, you know, situation of actually determining, you know, what's reasonably feasible. But it would be one way here to kind of clarify that and give some space for the board to more easily make a distinction.
Yeah, I'd rather have a timeline on making a plan, right, than on the actual implementation of the work is something that seems more logical to me, right? Like, you know, the idea of having a coalition of people who work together is great, but, you know, it would be nice to say, okay, here's when we're gonna have a plan by, and then from there, that's when you kind of do the work. Because getting, you know, 3, 6, however many parties together, to plant by the springtime, like, I don't even know what I'm planting in my own house where I'm the only person deciding because my husband doesn't care next spring. Right, so, yeah,
Maybe we add a second sentence, we extend the recommendation to add to the maximum extent possible, as you recommended, and then add a second sentence, which is possible plans will be communicated to the affected property owners by 9/30/2022, with execution by 5/15/2023. Something like that. So they got the possible plans to choose from by the end of September. If there's iteration needed in October, they have that iteration, and then that gives plenty of time to, you know, hire contractors, get people in place by the spring. So how does everyone feel about that? Okay. Any other discussion? All right, can I get a motion? Do you,
I'm gonna let you, because you got your note.
can I do the motion?
I do have the.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
But I can, if you can.
This is what I filled in water.
I can read the findings.
It's fine. Thanks. All right, this is the proposed findings of fact. RSU 26 site plan review, August 17, 2022. Pursuant to Article 6, Section 18-177 of the Orono Code of Ordinances, the Orono Planning Board has considered the applicant of Regional School Unit 26 to amend a previously approved site plan to add 3 accessory structures to a lot located at tax map 47-0, lot 12 in the MDR district. And based on all of the presented by the applicant, reviewing agencies, town departments, and the public found the following. 1, requirements of the district, that the proposed use is allowable use in the medium density residential district, and that the proposal complies with the applicable dimensional requirements of the district. Number 2, compliance with the town ordinances and codes, that the proposed use, structures, setbacks, buffers, and layout with the provisions of applicable regulations of the town, including all pertinent sections of Chapter 18 Land Use Ordinance. Number 3, utilization of the site, that this project is within the natural capabilities of the site, is located in a suitable area of the site, does not disturb environmental sensitive areas, fits with the existing topology of the site, and can accommodate any drainage associated with the construction. Number 4, traffic and pedestrian access, that no expansion of use is proposed, and therefore no change to traffic generation is anticipated. Number 5, natural features. The project does not propose any tree removal or impact to natural features. However, that there was vegetation removed caused by nearby infrastructure work unrelated to this application, and that to reestablish a screening and buffer in this project area, the applicant will work with the town to minimize the visual impact of this project on abutting residential properties. Number 6, other findings, that all other findings in fact made for the original site plan application approval at the February 26, 2020 planning board meeting remain unchanged by this amendment. All right, can I get a motion?
Got it, Ashley, or you? Yes.
no. And take notes.
I move that we approve the site plan by the Regional School Unit number 26 located at 6 Goodwich Drive, tax map 27-0, lot 12 in the medium density residential district to relocate a 12 by 31 press box and 14.5 by 21.5 storage shed on the property, which were originally proposed to be removed. In addition, the applicant calls for to locate the 4 by 8 storage container in the rear of the track with the following recommendations. That the RSU work with the town, who will communicate with the affected property owners to provide a screening option along the property line adjacent to the storage shed to minimize the visual impact of the abutting residential properties, while also developing a solution that works for all properties involved to the maximum extent possible. By a certain date that we want.
Possible plans will be communicated to the affected property owners by September 30th, 2022, with an execution of the plan by May 15th of 2023. Can I get a second? Second. Jessica?
For the approval of the site plan application from RSU 26, Judd McIntosh,
Approved.
John Beckett, Dave Thompson,
Approved.
Ashley Case,
Approved.
Michael Costello,
Approved.
Krista Schwenser,
approve,
Bob Bear.
Approved.
That's 7 for approval, none opposed.
Thank you, Jessica. Item number 5 is discussion.
Phil usually asks if what's on the agenda coming up. Yep. So far, we don't have any development applications, site plan or subdivisions. There is an ordinance amendment that'll be coming forward probably, so there will be a meeting at the very least to talk about that. It's something the town council has looked at for reducing off-street parking minimums. It's a pretty small, seemingly very small change when you look at the actual ordinance language itself. So I will probably, to kind of go alongside that, I provided the council committee level a presentation to kind of outline why, what the benefits are of that and why the town would be looking at something like that. So I might decide to just give that presentation to the planning board as well, just to give a little background and more visual overview of some of that. But yeah, so far that's it for the September meeting.
All right. Item 6, adjournment. Can I get a motion?
I second.
Yeah, Jessica?
For the adjournment of the August planning board meeting, Judd McIntosh,
Approved.
John Beckett,
Approved.
Dave Thompson,
Approved.
Ashley Case, Michael Costello,
Approved.
Krista Schwenser,
approve,
Bob Bear.
Approved.
That's 7 for adjournment, none opposed.
Thank you. Hopefully Phil's back next week, next month. Good job.
Thanks, everyone.
Man.
Thanks, Jeff. Bye, Krista.
Mhm.